Hey, what's going on? This video is going to be on flying with altimeter settings in IFR and VFR as well, but particularly important in IFR. So let's get to it. Why is it so important to update your altimeter to the most recent altimeter setting? Well, pilots only need to do this below 18,000 feet MSL. The FAA requires that all traffic flying at or above 18,000 feet MSL fly with a pressure altitude. This means all traffic sets their altimeter setting to 29.92 inches of mercury and leaves it for as long as they are at or above 18,000 feet MSL. These altitudes above 18,000 feet MSL are what we call flight levels. Flight levels are levels of altitude at or above 18,000 feet MSL that are abbreviated as FL followed by three numbers, where the three numbers is the pressure altitude in hundreds of feet MSL. For example, FL220 would refer to the pressure altitude of 22,000 feet MSL. Even when flying at flight levels at or above 18,000 feet MSL, you'll still want to keep track of current altimeter settings for when you descend below 18,000 feet, because you will need to adjust your altimeter at that point to be accurate so you can avoid obstacles in terrain closer to the ground. Now, ATC does a good job of telling you when to update your altimeter setting, but you as the pilot should also keep track of this. Instrument approaches are extremely reliant upon understanding exact altitudes above our runway's elevation. So if our altimeter setting is not up to date, our indicated altitude will be wrong, and our understanding of our above ground altitude will also be wrong. So things like minimum and decision altitudes will also be wrong. For example, if our runway elevation is 1,000 feet with a local altimeter setting of 30.22 inches of mercury, but we still have a setting of 29.92 input into our altimeter, then we will have an error of approximately 0.3 times 1,000 or 300 feet. So if we are coming down for an approach to 1,000 feet AGL, we would want our indicated altitude to read 2,000 feet. But if we still have our altimeter setting at 29.92, we will be 300 feet higher than we think. If we finally adjust our altimeter to the accurate setting of 30.22, our indicated altitude will increase 300 feet to be 2,300 feet, and we will therefore be 1,300 feet AGL instead of 1,000 feet AGL, where we need to be for our approach. Let's show you what this would look like. First, imagine an aircraft with a correct pressure setting of 30.22 input into their altimeter. The desired altitude for the approach is 2,000 feet MSL, which would put this pilot 1,000 feet above the runway elevation. Then let's imagine we duplicate that same aircraft, except that this new aircraft's pilot still has their altimeter setting wrongly set to 29.92. This would mean that this pilot's altimeter is off by minus 300 feet MSL. This means that in order to display 2,000 feet indicated on their altimeter, the pilot would actually be at 2,300 feet MSL, or 3,000 feet higher, to get the same indicated altitude. Now, if on the other hand, the local barometric pressure was 29.62 inches of mercury, then the pilot still flying with a wrong altimeter setting of 29.92 would be 300 feet lower, or at 1,700 feet MSL, in order to get an indicated altitude of 2,000 feet, because the altitude correction factor from 29.92 to 29.62 is a positive 300 feet. So you can imagine where this might cause a dangerous condition in IFR flight when flying through clouds. If you are approaching an airport to land without visibility, it is critical you trust your altitude indications. In the case of our pilot leaving his or her altimeter to 29.92 when the actual altimeter setting is 29.62, this pilot believes they're at 1,000 feet AGL when they are really at only 700 feet AGL. This can cause an approach that is way too low and in danger of objects or terrain below them. This is the same concept we have discussed before with the mnemonic device, high to low, look out below. When we fly from an area of higher pressure or higher temperature to an area of lower pressure or lower temperature, but do not change our altimeter setting for the new air mass, we are flying at a lower altitude than we have indicated and are in danger of striking terrain or obstacles below us.